Had other stuff to do. We survived an earthquake, but perhaps the most seismic event was the announcement of Bob Knakal's new firm, BKREA. I believe he'll be talking a little bit about that, perhaps maybe a historical perspective on how we got in this unique position that we're in. I know Serge Rada's in the audience. He was the first person that I really heard mention the S&L crisis, the savings and loan crisis, which for me, that kind of opened up, okay, we're not just comparing every crisis to the great financial crisis. There's a lot of context here. And so that made me think about you and your experience, 4 decades, and the things that you've seen. So hopefully you can share a couple inflection points, interesting projects that are kind of indicative of certain moments throughout time. But I'll let you really take it away and kind of own the classroom.
Okay, great,
Thank you very much.
Great to be here, as I said. And I really want to talk about what you guys want to talk about. So I want you to interrupt me, ask a lot of questions, that kind of thing. I thought what I do is tell you a little bit about NewCo, because that's a new and exciting thing, and then talk about some historical stuff, some inflections that have happened over the years, and how we handled that decision making differently. But number one, yeah, BKREA, new firm, the 5th firm that I've worked for in 40 years. I've been brokering here in New York since 1984. I love the business. I think it's the coolest business in the world. It is probably the purest form of meritocracy that exists. You get out of it exactly what you put into it, and I really like that aspect of it. I've also come to find out I'm a horrible employee. I'm a pretty good business owner, but I've been fired twice. And, so that came into play when I decided what I was going to do when I grow up. So decided to start my own firm. We are going to basically do the same thing that I've done for 40 years, which is sell buildings. We're going to do debt, we're going to do equity, and use AI in a really big way. And I think that if I look at myself as a guy who's starting a company that's going to rely heavily on AI, it's almost laughable. Because for almost my entire career, I was happy my cell phone went on in the morning. I'm the least technologically advanced person that you possibly could have. Technology was never a big thing. I kept my BlackBerry years longer than I should have. I kept my flip phone years longer than I should have. And now I have come to terms with the fact that I don't believe AI is going to replace anybody, but somebody using AI is going to replace somebody that's not using AI. It's massively powerful. The potential is incredible, but I think there are 2 main functionalities that I think AI is going to allow for. One is from a brokerage perspective, and everything I'm going to talk about is that my perspective as a broker, so I'm the guy who's trying to sell buildings in the city. Number one is the day-to-day operations of the business, which is prospecting, trying to find people that want to sell, and the efficiencies that AI can help with outreach, and then the execution of the business once you get hired, sending out mass text, sending out mass emails, sending out ringless voice messages. You press a button, send out 100,000 ringless voice messages to people's cell phones. Personalized. I mean, unbelievable. We're going to send mass videos, personalized videos, digitizing myself so that I can sit there and type text in, and then somebody that looks like me is going to say, "Hey, Fred, how are you today? Really want to tell you about this deal." And I'm going to be able to send those videos to 10,000 people at a time. I mean, unbelievable what you're going to be able to do with this stuff. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of AI that I think is really, really interesting, compelling, tremendous potential, but is going to fall flat in most cases, is the analytical ability that AI has. AI can do millions of calculations in a second. And so theoretically, you could take data sets and manipulate those data sets and get all kinds of really instructive information out of that data set. But why it's not going to be that effective is because most data sets in real estate are terrible. And the reason they're terrible is that if you think about third-party data aggregators, and I don't want to mention any by name, but third-party data aggregators hire a bunch of kids right out of college, say, "Hey, call up Larry Silverstein and ask for his inside information about that deal that he just did." Number one, can he get Larry on the phone? Number two, if he gets Larry on the phone, why would Larry give the inside information to the person he doesn't know? And if you think about it from that person's perspective, so they have this spreadsheet in front of them with a lot of boxes, their boss is looking over their shoulder. If the boxes are blank, they're not doing a good job. If the boxes are filled in, then they've done their job. So, hey, what was the cap rate on that deal? I don't know, let me write this down, let's move on. I believe that the data is really, really not good. So you could have the best algorithmic models in the world, but if you put data into it that's not good, you're going to get something that's not good out of it. Secondly, the data itself is not all that instructive. It's the relationship between the data that becomes meaningful. So if I tell you in 2019, there was $26 billion of sales volume in Manhattan, what do you think? It's hard to kind of understand what that means. But if I tell you at the peak of the market in 2015, there was $57.4 billion of sales. In 2020, there was $11 billion in sales. All of a sudden, that $26 billion starts to get some tangibility to it, and you start to understand. And it's not the absolute numbers that matter, it's the relationship between these numbers. How much are they going up or are they going down? How much are they going up? How much are they going down? And in order for there to be integrity within the relationships between those numbers, the methodology has to be the same. If I ask you to calculate a cap rate, how are you going to calculate a cap rate? Using trailing 12 months information? Using forward 12 months information? What if there are vacancies? Are you making projections for those vacancies? What's your stabilized vacancy rate? So if I tell you that the cap rate in one period was 5 and the cap rate in another period is 5.5, but two different people did those cap rates and they used different methodologies, the relationship between those numbers goes away. So the thing I'm excited about is that the data sets that we have used the same exact methodology for 40 years. My data set for multifamily properties and for land values in New York has used the same exact methodology for 40 years. My data set has very, very high integrity. And so I think the AI models we're creating are going to produce some very predictive things about the market. And I think we're going to be able to say, hey, based on this factor or this combination of factors, it's very likely in 14 months this is going to happen to the land market. Think about how unbelievably powerful that is. But if you don't have a great data set to put into the models, it won't work. And I can tell you, I've seen big national and global real estate companies have 4 different heads of research over the last 10 years. I guarantee you, each of them thinks they have the right way to do it. There's no methodology table that says, hey, this is the way you calculate these things. You know, a building on Columbus Avenue with a store on the ground floor and 20 apartments above. It's a walk-up building. Does that go into the walk-up bucket? Or does that go into the mixed-use bucket? You say, well, it has a store on the ground floor. That's a mixed-use building. The Empire State Building has stores on the ground floor. Is that a mixed-use building? Or is that an office building? How are you characterizing these things? Methodology is so important, and the consistency of how you create the data is what will allow AI to really be extraordinarily powerful. So because we have these data sets that have been done the same way for so long, I'm really curious to see what's going to come out of that, and I don't think anybody else has that. Maybe some appraisers that have data for a decade or two, they've done their analysis the same way, but it's probably just very siloed with respect to what
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Is that a criticism? That's okay. That's okay. You're probably saying this guy is so boring. Here's SpongeBob. All right. So yes.
Can I ask you? So these insights are from the macro, right? So can you give us some insight into like what exactly distinguishes your data? Like, are there any specific data points that you've been tracking that you don't think other people have?
Well, I think I'll go into the map room too. There's been a lot of, if you follow me on social media, a lot of about the map room. The map room really was a response to a frustration that if you try to find the pipeline of stuff that's under development in the city, there's not really good data out there. And from my perspective, You go walk down the street, stand in front of a building, you see it's under construction, you know it's under construction. It's either under construction or it's not. But the only data set that really is anywhere near robust is the data set of how many condos are under construction. But if you look at Douglas Elliman's report, it'll say there are 9,000 units. And if you look at Corcoran's report, it says there are 5,000 units. And it always I couldn't figure that out. I'm like, look, it's either under construction or it's not. But when do you start counting the building? Okay, guys, please eat.
This is where you ignore the men.
When do you start counting it? When do you stop counting it? We have guidelines for each of the buckets of data, and that's for the condo market. For the other markets, for residential rental, hotel, office, virtually nothing. So I said, you know what? I analyze land a lot. I need to know what the pipeline of competition for this site is. I'm going to go count these buildings. But who the heck has time to walk every block of Manhattan? All right, so it's March 12th, 2020. We're told, go home for a couple of weeks, let this thing pass over, and then you can come back, everything will be fine. So I go home, and my doctor calls me up, and he says, hey, Bob, there's a rumor going around, they're going to shut Manhattan down, close all the bridges and tunnels, quarantine the whole island, get the heck out of New York. So within an hour, I'm in the car on my way up to my country house. And 2 weeks later, it was very apparent that we weren't going to be back to normalcy anytime soon. So I had left the city in such haste. There were a number of things I left. I had to drive back into town to get them. And I pull up the FDR Drive, and I'm like, holy shit, this is a ghost town. This is like a science fiction movie. There was nobody. There were no cars moving on the streets. There were no people on the streets. Every store was closed. And within a couple of minutes, it occurred to me, hey, you know what? If I'm ever going to walk around town and look at buildings, this is the perfect time. So I called up my team. I said, hey, go make copies of the Sanborn map. And next Wednesday, I had each week, I had a couple of different people come with me. We'd go park the car somewhere like in the middle of 3rd Avenue, park the car, get out, walk around for a half hour, drive 10 blocks down, get out, walk around for a half hour. We covered the whole city in 4 months, 220 hours in the field. I highlighted everything in different colors. I highlighted anything that was under construction or demolished was green. Individual properties that were a potential development site looked like they were built to less than 25% of their maximum density, highlighted in orange. Assemblage sites were highlighted in yellow. Subsequently, we had to do a lot of research on the assemblage sites, and you have 10 buildings on the block front. If there were 10 separate owners, we threw that in the garbage. If there was one owner that owned 5 or 6 of them, that became a potential site. Then we looked at each of the different buckets, and we said, okay, for a condo building, when does a building go from being a site that a developer bought to being something that's actively under construction? And we said, well, getting a building permit, that's a good sign, but that doesn't really mean anything because you can get a permit and not build. You could get a demolition permit, that's a good sign, but you can knock the building down and not have a plan to move forward. So we said, let's put them in a pending bucket until a developer gets a construction loan. The minute they get a construction loan, they're starting to pay big interest every single day. So nobody's going to close on a construction loan if they're not ready to start building. So you become an active development site when you get a construction loan. And then for each of the different types of properties, you go from active to completed based on different thresholds. For a hotel, as soon as you get your TCO, you're completed, you go into the completed bucket. For a rental building, as soon as you're 50% rented, you go into the completed bucket. For a condo building, 70% sold, you go into the completed bucket. Office building, TCO, you're completed. So we have these hurdles that take a development site from pending to active to completed, and we have the development pipeline for each of those buckets is broken down, everything's broken down into the 5 buckets: rental, condo, hotel, office, and miscellaneous, for everything that doesn't fit into the first 4 buckets. And we have to the square inch. We know everything that is being built in every marketplace. So when we do a valuation, we know what the comp set is going to look like for that building when it comes online. So that's one thing. The other thing and anybody can do that. I think we were 220 hours in the field. If If we did it today, with today's traffic, it's probably 1,000 hours in the field. I don't think anybody's crazy enough to do that, but if they did, they could do the same thing. What other folks don't have is the historical data that we have. The 40 years of land sales where we've called the buyer and seller of every single site, found out were the bonus rights in place? Did you buy any air rights? Did you have the air rights before you closed? Was it afterwards? Did you have to pay for easements? Did you have to buy tenants out? Like I sold the site up on 77th and 2nd, the northwest corner, and it looks like if you just take the sale price of the building and divide it by the buildable footage, it looks like one thing. Everybody else has that one thing. But everybody else doesn't know that $1.5 million was paid for an easement that you needed at the back of the building for the adjacent property. Didn't know that they paid $3 million for a first right of refusal on 2 townhouses on 78th Street to potentially put an entrance in. And didn't know that they paid $10 million to 2 rent-stabilized tenants to get them out. So you add all this up, it's a $15 million different price than the whole market believes. So that's the information that differentiates you from everybody else in the market.
How did you find out that kind of information inside? Because that's very private. I would say. Like,
Well, I was the broker on the deal, so I
you were the
knew.
broker. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise it's
It's hard to get, but again, comparing, let's say Gary Barnett buys a deal I was not the broker on. Gary's a client, he's a friend. I call him up, hey Gary, tell me about that deal. Were the bonus rights in place? Did you have to buy tenants? Did you have an environmental issue there? Gary wants me to offer him the next deal, so he's going to tell me. But if Sammy from a third-party aggregator calls him up, Gary's going to slam the phone down. Why would Gary tell that kid? Right? So that's where the integrity of the data sets really becomes a really, really important
so
thing.
you would say that the kind of the integrity of the data is also based on the quality of your relationships.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. But I think it's the consistency of methodology over the long term. So that, again, the absolute numbers are not nearly as important as the relationship between the numbers. And if you haven't done the analysis the same exact way every time, that relationship falls apart.
And so how do you track these kind of additional, I guess, as messy as quantitative data is, the qualitative data that is really like deeply proprietary, right? It's only exchanged within the one-on-one relationship in some cases. I know for me, I try to dig through like ACRIS and to see what's going on these deeds, and normally leads to more questions than answers. So when you have like a firm, you confirm that this is true, but it's qualitative and it's maybe hard to put down neatly, concisely. How do you report that?
Well, there are some things that are obvious. First thing you look for, can you get an inclusionary housing bonus in this zoning district? If so, most people are going to try to get that. Did they have it in place? Did the seller buy it and include it with the package? Does the buyer have to go get it afterwards? And it's important with things like that to understand that what you pay for the as-of-right development rights, the developer doesn't care about. They care about what they pay on a blended basis. At the end of the day, how much am I paying for every square foot? So I explained that I was testifying in court, and the judge just wasn't grabbing this concept of, because in Hudson Yards particularly, this was a Hudson Yards site that I did, and you have the base floor area ratio, then you have district improvement bonus rights, and you have Eastern Rail Yards rights. And I was trying to explain that what's paid for the as of right almost doesn't matter, because you're buying these other 2 buckets of rights at very low prices. And she wasn't getting it. So I explained it. I said there used to be a restaurant on 50th Street between Madison and Park called Maloney and Porcelli, owned by the guys that own Smith & Wolenski's. And one of the entrees on the menu was French fries. The French fries was $50, but came with a side order of filet mignon. Right? So I said, if you're getting a plate of filet mignon and fries and you're paying $50, do you care how much you pay for the fries versus how much you pay for the steak? $49 for the fries, $1 for the steak. What's the difference? $50 for the plate. That's the way you look at these development deals. So whenever a developer has the right to blend their basis down by incorporating bonus rights, they're very, very likely to do it. Because the bonus rights are almost always at a price lower than they paid for the land. So what is the blended rate? So you have to do that in every situation. Where, and west of 9th Avenue, you have the DIV and the ERYs available in Hudson Yards. Between 8th and 9th, you buy 5 FAR of DIV and you can buy 6 FAR of inclusionary. It's all these different things in different districts. You have to know them and then you can ask. It's always better to ask somebody a specific question. You don't want to call them, hey, did you buy any bonus rights? Or hey, did you buy the DIV for that? Did you buy the ERYs? How did you buy the ERYs? And so you have